Good evening, hello, and a warm welcome. Namaskar, Adab. You're watching yet another edition of Let's Talk Policy. I'm Smita Sharma, and we try and bring in these deep dive conversations so that young policy aspirants they can take advantage of some of the insights from some of our excellent experts here. Just a quick reminder before we get on to the webinar and I introduce the speaker today. Please do check out the admissions are on for the MPP course at the Kautilya School of Public Policy in Hyderabad for the batch of 2026 and 2028. So take a look at the prospectus and see if it's of interest. Reach out to the team if you have any queries regarding the faculty admission, logistics, or anything else. So today I have with me Dr. Rathin Roy, who is a noted economist. Somebody who was was an economic advisor to the 13th Finance Commission, and currently he is also the Dean for Humanities and Social Sciences at the GITAM University. Thank you so much, Dr. Rathin Roy, for joining us here in this episode of Let's Talk Policy.
Thank you for having me.
And I think what we thought about was it's been a few days. Of course, after budget, there are a lot of analysis that do happen of the budget, but the devil, as they say, always lies in the fine print, the details. So with some days, which has now passed, it's a good time to take a look at where India stands amidst all this big noise about the AI summit, the big budgetary numbers. How do we break it down? And how do you, as young students and policy aspirants, really learn to look at the budget papers? My first question to you, Dr. Roy, really to start with. I mean, I know in the immediate wake of the budget, your comments were that the budget did not look like it had structural reforms, especially when it came to youth unemployment or stagnant wages and low productivity. Can you elaborate on those takes on the budget?
Yeah, well, there are two things I think, since we're talking to policy students, they should remember. Anyone who starts talking about the budget in terms of so many lakh crores given to this or so many thousand crores given to this is talking rubbish. You cannot evaluate a budget that way. Everything in the budget must be evaluated against two metrics: changes in the share of something. For example, the share of health in total spending, or the share of personal income tax in total income tax or in total tax, right? Or as a percentage of the size of the economy. And the size of the economy is measured by GDP. So that's how I'm going to give you a snapshot now. Bear this in mind, not in lakh crores. That is, somebody's trying to fool you when they talk in terms of lakh crores and thousand crores. This budget, the total size of the budget is smaller than the size of the budget last year. And the size of the budget last year was smaller than the size of the budget before that. COVID intervened, but before COVID also, the size of the budget measured by total expenditure as a percentage of GDP was shrinking. The central government has been shrinking since at least 2014. COVID, obviously, it borrowed a lot of money and became bigger because it had to spend money, and then it started shrinking again. Now, this lower total expenditure to GDP ratio has meant lower borrowing. So basically, this year also, the total contraction in expenditure GDP compared to last year is exactly equal to the total contraction in borrowing as compared to last year. What else can the government do to spend money other than borrowing? Well, the government can do two things. It can tax people. It can get non-tax revenues, chiefly from public sector companies that it owns, or it can sell public sector companies, and that's called disinvestment. Taxation has been stagnant as a percentage of GDP for the last 7 years. Disinvestment has been a dramatic failure. It was just 0.6% of GDP in 2016, and now it is down to 0.2%, and even this year they failed to meet their target. It's not as bad as in 2018, when they said they would collect 230,000 crores and hold your breath, ended up collecting only 23,000 crores. It's a different matter that the person in charge of that is now in charge of SEBI, but that's how life seems to be in government. So the government is not able to collect more taxes. Non-tax revenues are flat. Students will have observed there's a lot of talk before the budget about RBI dividend. Now, when people abroad look at this, they laugh. And they say dividends from the central bank should be an accounting item. They can't be so important in the revenues the government gets. But in India, they are because non-tax revenues are poor. So the RBI is more profitable than ONGC or the petroleum companies. So the government has been what I've been calling in a fiscal crisis for a long time, central government. Revenue constrained, high borrowing because of COVID has to be reduced. Otherwise, there's no money in the economy for the private sector. And therefore, it has been shrinking its expenditure. That's as far as the budget goes, headline one. Headline two, forward looking budget. Now, here, I would like students to understand this. A forward looking budget must have a forward looking target. So let me start by saying in the budget, there are two statements which historically are given forward looking targets, 3 to 5 year targets. I am not talking about 2047. I am not an astrologer. Unlike most people in government and in the private sector and in the media, I like talking about things that are going to happen within a controllable
Can
lifespan.
I just
So,
intervene for a
yeah,
one short question because you brought this up? तो
sure.
ये जब हम टारगेट्स देते हैं 2047 की बात कर रहे हैं, चाइना में हम देखते हैं वहां पे भी एक 2045 की टारगेट्स दी जाती हैं कंट्रीज की. दीज आर पॉलिटिकल टारगेट्स एसेंशियली. देन ये
These
इकोनॉमिक्स से
are,
जुड़ी हुई
well,
टारगेट्स नहीं
no,
है.
China is a far more advanced country than us. So China has something called a 5 year plan, which has very detailed targets. And when they then provide targets for the next 20 years, those are based on the targets for the next 5 years. India में हम बस छोड़ते हैं. So that's what I'm trying to tell you. The government of India, the Ministry of Finance, no entity in the government of India has an official target for what India's GDP will be in 2030 or 2029 or 2028. They know what India's GDP will be in 2047. I call that astrology, not analysis. Very disappointingly, for many years now, the budget has had two statements attached to it, macroeconomic policy statement and macroeconomic fiscal statement, which are supposed to provide these 3 to 4 year targets for revenue, expenditure, deficits, GDP, etc. This year, that was just removed. They've only provided next year's numbers, which I can get from the budget anyway, and not spoken about 2030. So, in a sense, I'm saying this budget is not forward looking because we are flying blind. I mean, if any sane policy analyst comes to any senior person and says, Sir, I have a target for 2047, but I have no clue what's going to happen in 2 or 3 or 4 years, that person should be immediately sort of given a cup of tea and asked to leave, right? Unfortunately, this particular case is happening across the government of India, every single economic ministry, including the Prime Minister's office, and you can't tell the whole government of India to have a cup of tea and check out.
We can't. And just let me remind जो हमारे audiences हैं यहाँ पर, if you want, please feel free to drop your questions for Dr. Roy in the chat box. I'll be happy to take them. And I'll also keep my conversation bilingual क्योंकि हमारे बहुत सारे ऐसे aspirants हो सकते हैं जो इंडिया के दूर दराज क्षेत्रों से हों but who want to pursue policy. So we'll keep it a mix of Hindi and English. Dr. Roy, also coming back to a key question then, जब आप कह रहे हैं कि हमारी बजट श्रिंक हो रही है, गवर्नमेंट के पास वो जो मनी स्पेंड करने के लिए है वो भी कम हो रहा है, ऐसे में क्या जो हमारी सोशल स्पेंडिंग्स हैं, पर्टिकुलरली अब मनरेगा को तो नाम बदल दिया है हमने, वीबी जी राम जी कर दिया है, क्या ये स्पेंडिंग्स आपको रिड्यूस होती हुई नजर आ रही हैं? अगर ऐसा है तो वो सही है, वो गलत है, उसको एक ऑर्डिनरी हमारी जो स्टूडेंट्स हैं वो कैसे देखें?
अच्छा, इसके लिए आपको मेरे कुछ लेख पढ़ने पड़ेंगे जो आप स्टूडेंट से जरूर पढ़े होंगे, मतलब उस अखबार में है, हिंदी में भी है, अंग्रेजी में भी है और मराठी में भी है. मराठी बोलायचं तर मला विचार करायचा तर विचारा, बांग्ला प्रश्न पावा. वी डोंट हैव टू गेट हिंदी डॉमिनेटिंग हियर, तेलुगु
Yeah, sure.
माట్లాడండి నాకు. But see, there is something called a development state.
Hmm.
And the development state is trying always to spend money on two things. One is to develop the economy, so infrastructure, right? Highways, industry, etc. So the government puts in money directly there. And the other is to provide something very important, what we call merit goods, which are things that will help human capital to grow. Health, education, water supply, sanitation, women's empowerment, very important. It's a merit good. In a society with patriarchy, empowering women is a merit good, right? Since the last about, I'd say, 20 years, since about the end of UPA 1, we are neither investing in the economy, the said government of India, nor providing merit goods. Instead, we have become what I call अ कॉम्पेंसेटरी स्टेट। इसका मतलब ये हुआ कि माफ कीजिए, मैं तो अमीर हो गया हूं, स्मिता जी भी अमीर हो गए हैं और थे कभी। लेकिन आप लोग 1991 की लिबरलाइजेशन के बाद आपको खास फायदा नहीं हुआ, तो माफ कीजिए, आप तो वही के वही रहे, तो ये मुझसे कुछ कॉम्पेंसेशन लीजिए। 800 मिलियन लोगों को फूड सब्सिडी दे, किसी को एक फ्री बस पास दे दिया, किसी को कुछ आवास दे दिया, ठीक है। So basically, if you look at the budget, the proportion of compensatory expenditures from the government of India have increased very sharply at the expense of health education and at the expense, obviously, of public investment. So that, because public investment now they start fudging, they say, let's do PPP, let's do this, let's get the private sector to do it, right? There has been some increase in capital expenditure in the last 5 years. The government has made a big noise about it. I like it because that means that current expenditure is lower. But what has happened is a bit of a state of a hand. Not all of it, but a large measure, certainly till last year. Capital expenditure in the central government happens from two places. This is investment in bricks and mortar, yeah? It happens from the budget, and central government public sector undertakings, PSUs, do it. So Railways does it, Hindustan Petroleum does it. What you find is that the PSUs, capital investment, has collapsed. That means their profits have increased. Those have been transferred to the government, which has then used those increased profits to increase capital investment. एक हाथ से दूसरे हाथ, ठीक है। अब इस साल थोड़ा सा एडिशनैलिटी है, बट इज नॉट एज इफ देयर बीन अ ट्रांसफॉर्मेशनल इंक्रीज इन कैपिटल इन्वेस्टमेंट, ठीक है। So that also, I'm afraid, it's very, I'm an old hand at this. ये सब मेरे साथ नहीं चलेगा. That state of hand is easy to catch. So the government essentially, it's a government of India is doing more and more, is compensating people for development failures. It is no longer a development state. It is now a compensatory state. And this budget, like the budget before and the budget before, and this is bipartisan. This has been going on since the end of UPA 1, UPA 2 onwards. So only it's accelerated now because these are also, I try frankly to make a political point. I think governments have understood that doing the hard work of delivering health, education, infrastructure, it's hard, it can fail. If you give compensation like this, electoral results show that you give people some money, some compensation, especially before election.
Hmm.
It's good for voting. Not just,
Hmm.
again, not just the ruling party. Yeah? It's become, I
Hmm.
think, a bad habit with all the parties. It's a kind of easy way out to getting electoral success.
Whoever
Big
is
message.
ruling in whichever
हाँ,
state
मैं पैसे
at
दे दिया,
power.
मुझे वोट मिल गया, अब काहे को मैं build a school, put teachers there, improve education quality, you know? And then
Hmm.
people have also lost aspiration. With successful failures to deliver these things, people now say, give me something, it's okay.
तो क्या यही वजह है कि हम देखते हैं कि जहां हम एक तरफ बात करते हैं हमारे आंकड़ों की, वी टॉक अबाउट बिकमिंग, एंड आई एम ऑलवेज कंफ्यूज्ड वेदर वी आर द थर्ड लार्जेस्ट और द फोर्थ लार्जेस्ट इकोनॉमी राइट नाउ, वी टॉक अबाउट लार्ज जीडीपी नंबर्स एंड ऑल ऑफ दैट, बट इंडिविजुअल प्रॉस्पेरिटी हमारी, जो हमारी इंडिविजुअल हाई पर कैपिटल इनकम है, क्या उनमें सिग्निफिकेंट प्रोग्रेस हो रहा है जब हम हाई लार्ज इकोनॉमीज की हम पायदान पर ऊपर चढ़ रहे हैं?
बहुत बढ़िया सवाल है। इसका एक मैं सिंपल एनालॉजी से आपके दर्शकों को मैं समझाता हूँ। मैं बंबई से आता हूँ। बंबई में एक इलाका है, उसका नाम है धारावी। शायद आपने पिक्चर में देखा होगा। धारावी एक जमाने में एशिया का सबसे बड़ा स्लम था। कुछ तरक्की जरूर हुई है, फिर भी वहां की आबादी अधिकांश तरीके से गरीब है। दे आर पुअर पीपल लिविंग इन धारावी, मेजॉरिटी ऑफ देम, बट देयर आर लॉट ऑफ पीपल लिविंग देयर, मिलियंस। So the city of Bombay, if I carved it into different units, I would find that Dharavi would be the third or fourth largest area in terms of total income of Dharavi. But in terms of per capita income, it would be much lower than South Bombay, right? Because rich people live in South Bombay. Same is true of us. We are the third. We are in the G20 because we are a very poor and very large country. If you multiply 1.4 billion people by $3,000, you become large. You become the third or fourth largest economy. In contrast, if you take even a economy that's sputtering like the UK, right? 44 million people, they have a per capita income of 45 or $50,000. That means they're only slightly behind 1.4 billion people in India. So prosperity is in multiples. That's one problem. We are far behind. Let me put it this way: even if our aggregate income doubles in the next 7 or 8 years, our per capita income will be one quarter that of even Belgium. Sri Lanka and Bangladesh have higher per capita incomes than India. So let's not get ahead of ourselves talking about a mass of large poor people. We are the Dharavi of the world. Number two, if this was not bad enough, there is a north-south divide. The economies of Tamil Nadu and Kerala suit Karnataka and Telangana. are as rich as Indonesia, which means their per capita income is $4,000. The economies of UP and Bihar are poorer than Nepal. Of course, poorer than Bangladesh, but poorer than even Nepal, right? So, but the majority of people live there. Majority of people live in the poorer regions of India. So not just as this fourth largest economy masks the per capita income problem, it also masks the serious problem that the areas where the majority of people live, that is the Hindi belt and the eastern states, are poorer than, are much poorer than the four peninsular or southern states. So there are two dimensions to this problem, which is going to cause a huge structural problem going forward.
Let me quickly take in one audience question that is here. Basavaraj is asking, sir, what role can MSMEs play in large-scale job creation, and what policy gaps still holds them back?
Well, MSMEs in the informal sector are already playing a role in large-scale job creation. They are creating all the jobs. In the non-agricultural sector, between 85 to 90% of value added is happening in MSMEs in the unorganized sector. And about 75 to 80% of the jobs are happening there. The question is, are we going to be so you can create a lot of jobs. कौन किसी ने बोला था शायद ना कि पकौड़े बेच के आदमी अपना कमा सकता है, भूल गया मैं कौन है, पता नहीं कौन था. खैर, so if we the question is not the kind of job you have. The question is whether they can provide you with decent jobs. A good example is Italy, notoriously bureaucratic, quite corrupt, just like us. A powerhouse economy, but it was powered by MSMEs. MSMEs producing high value stuff that gave high value jobs. So the challenge in India is not so much for MSMEs to provide jobs. If I have 2,000 pakodewalas and 9,000 Ubers and 4,000 Olas and they're all little MSMEs, उससे मेरा कोई फायदा नहीं होगा. I need my MSMEs to producing high value stuff, making high productivity stuff, and therefore making high profits and therefore paying people better. That
हाई
pathway
वैल्यू
is
जॉब्स आप
possible.
कैसे क्वांटिफाई करेंगे हमारे इस इकोनॉमिक सूरत हाल में? व्हाट अकॉर्डिंग टू यू विल बी अ डिसेंट जॉब, अ हाई वैल्यू जॉब?
अब देखिए, ये तो आपने और भी बढ़िया सवाल पूछा, क्योंकि आपको मैं बड़े सिंपल उदाहरण से देता हूं. लास्ट ईयर द गवर्नमेंट ऑफ इंडिया increased income tax exemption limits to 1 lakh rupees a month. Now, if you don't earn 1 lakh, you don't pay income tax. When 35 years ago, when I did my first job, I was earning 3,500 rupees a month and I paid income tax. Because, and I lived in Delhi, with that income, if there were EMIs then, tab nahi the, if EMI BMI tha, with 5 years salary or 6 years max, I could afford a house. With 5 years, definitely in East Delhi, which is a low-end area. But even in Vasant Kunj or something, upcoming areas in those days, in South Delhi, with 6, 7 years, I could afford a house. But there were no EMI, so I didn't buy one. Today, the same person, the same job I was doing, lecturer in a college, now earns about 65,000 rupees a month. But she can't afford a house on 65,000 rupees a month, earning 7.5 lakhs a year. 7 years salary will give you 49 lakhs. What are you going to buy in Delhi? So that person cannot afford to buy a house and therefore cannot afford to pay income tax. Put another way, per capita income tax starts getting paid in India if you earn 6 times the per capita income. In the UK, you have to earn only 30% of the per capita income. In Brazil, income tax starts at the per capita income. Even in Pakistan, the country everyone loves to hate, it starts at 3 times the per capita income. What that means is that there is an affordability crisis in India. Decent jobs now require a very, very large tax exemption. So I'm afraid the pathway to decent jobs is going to be difficult without what we economists call, a bit of jargon, an incomes policy. इसका सिर्फ ये मतलब हुआ कि not just looking at growth and inflation, आमदनी पे भी ध्यान दीजिए at the policy level. Let me give you one more example of that very quickly, since we are in South India. I think your viewers will all agree that to have a job in Apple, Foxconn, or in Samsung or in Ford, these are organized sector manufacturing jobs, dream white collar, blue collar jobs. You know the salaries these people pay? 23,000 rupees a month. Okay? So this dream job is paying you so little. When you go and ask them, they'll say, well, the productivity in Vietnam is 300% that of India. Because we have a poor education system, poor skill system, productivity is very low. So we are competing on starvation, almost quasi-slave wages. Now, the things to do is to have an income target. I'll be telling the Tamil Nadu government this and say, no, Apple workers in 3 years must earn 50,000. For that, we have to double productivity. If we double productivity, half goes to Apple or Ford or Samsung, half comes to the worker, we can increase wages by 40%. When you do that and 40% is there in the pocket, that person can go out and buy more things. When that person buys more things, that creates more jobs. That's the win-win. Increase
Hmm.
productivity, increase incomes, increase spending, increase economic activity. That is what is not happening, and therefore having decent, well-paid, modern jobs has to be a policy target now, not just employment. Maybe उत्तर भारत में उनको नौकरी चाहिए, हमें यहाँ
हम्म।
अच्छी नौकरी चाहिए.
ये बहुत अच्छी एक डिवाइड, जो वरिसम डिवाइड भी है नॉर्थ साउथ इंडिया की। और एक आपने वो जो इम्पोर्टेंट बात कही है, एक जो यहाँ फ्रॉम अ कॉमन मैन्स परसेप्शन परहैप्स ये हो कि अगर मैन्युफैक्चरिंग आ जाएगी तो हमारी शायद जॉब्स जो है वो बेहतर हो जाएंगे, बट यू आर सेइंग कि इसेंशियली even the jobs that the foreign companies which are creating bases here need not necessarily be paying as much compared to what they're paying in other places, which brings me to a then the question कि इस बार की बजट में जो दो तीन अनाउंसमेंट्स किए गए, जिसमें से एक कहा गया कि हम लॉन्ग टर्म टैक्स हॉलीडेज देंगे हाईटेक इलेक्ट्रॉनिक्स मैन्युफैक्चरिंग को अप टू 2032। दूसरा, जो इंडिया बेस्ड डेटा सेंटर्स हैं हु आर प्रोवाइडिंग क्लाउड सर्विसेज, दे विल आल्सो गेट टैक्स हॉलीडेज टिल 2047। Will this lead to more manufacturing, more setting up of shops here within India, and will it lead to, as you define, जो थोड़े बेहतर क्वालिटी ऑफ जॉब्स हैं, नॉट जस्ट वेरी बेसिक जॉब्स?
वो जो आपने लास्ट पे पूछा whether it will create better quality of jobs, वो देखना पड़ेगा. I think in Telangana it is creating better quality of jobs. I mean, all these activities. But let's come to the tax things. The first thing, I like the idea very much of giving long-term holidays. But I have a small problem. Does that mean we have become a one-party state? As far as I know, the next election is in 2029. How can you commit a future government with probably a different, maybe economic dispensation to a policy like this, is even for 2029, 2032? 2043 is 20 years away. For which very good reason in democracies, normally governments don't make commitments beyond their term of office. Maybe this government knows something I don't, that is going to stay in office forever, in which case, perhaps, I suppose it can't say so, but I would be a little disturbed to think that that is the basis on which policy is being made. The second problem is the what I'll call a specifically India problem. हमारे जबान का माने जो है ना, वो नहीं है अंतरराष्ट्रीय स्फीयर में. क्यों बता रहा हूं ये? दो उदाहरण दे सकता हूं. एक तो इतिहास में है. We had something called a retrospective tax, which was imposed, and it caused a lot of fuss. Rightly so, because you can't impose taxes retrospectively. मतलब आज के आमदनी पे आप टैक्स इंपोज कर सकते हो. अगर कल आपने टैक्स दिया, आप मुझे बोलोगे आपकी यू शुड स्टार्ट पेइंग एक्स्ट्रा इनकम टैक्स फ्रॉम 2015, I'll lose credibility with you. They did that. This year they have done one more thing to lose credibility. It's a small thing. It's a very important thing. It's important for India, and I'll conclude with that, this answer. They had come out with something called gold bonds when I was in fact in Delhi. Gold bonds are basically ये सोना अपने बिस्तर के पीछे मत रखो. Please put it in a bank. We will then use that. We will collateralize that and invest it or spend it. We'll pay you interest on those bonds. The interest on those bonds will be tax free. अब क्या बोला है? The interest on the bonds and if you sell that bond, the value can change. It will be tax free. अब बोला है नहीं. If you're the first person who bought a bond, then it will be tax free. But suppose I bought a bond and sold it to Smita Sharma, and she sells it then tomorrow to Syed Akbaruddin. All right? If you make a capital gain, that will not be tax free. अरे आपने अपना जबान तोड़ा. If the finance ministries of any country, and I should know, work on credibility and only credibility. Credibility is the most precious asset of any finance ministry, any finance minister. अपना जबान खराब करना, आपकी जबान की तहजीब ना रखना. This is the worst thing a finance minister can do, and I'm terribly upset for this reason about this budget, because they have done something non-credible, and they have also said things, made commitments way beyond their term of office. This is politically irresponsible and ethically wrong.
Okay, very important points there. Dr. Roy, मैं एक और आपसे पूछना चाहूंगी, and a quick reminder to our participants, we have around last 15-20 minutes. If you have questions, please drop them in the chat box. एक चीज पर जिस पर आप काफी जोर दे रहे हैं लगातार, which is you are saying कि इनकम डिस्टेंस, जहां जो 16 फाइनेंस कमीशन का फॉर्मूला है वो अभी भी जो है इनकम डिस्टेंस पर फोकस कर रहा है, जिसके तहत आप गरीब राज्यों को ज्यादा फंड्स दे रहे हैं. इसमें प्रॉब्लम क्या लगता है? क्योंकि सुनकर तो यही लगता है कि दैट इज हाउ अ स्टेट शुड बिहेव, कि भाई अगर आप गरीब राज्य हैं तो आप जो हैं उनको आप ज्यादा सपोर्ट दें।
ठीक है, बहुत ही महत्वपूर्ण सवाल है ये। इनफैक्ट आई वुड से फॉर द रिपब्लिक इट इज एन एग्जिस्टेंशियल क्वेश्चन। पहले तो मैं आपको एक एनेक्डोट बताऊं। आई यूज्ड टू बी द चीफ इकोनॉमिस्ट ऑफ द 13th फाइनेंस कमीशन। तो उसमें हमारा एक काम होता है कि हम हर राज्य में जाते हैं, वी गो टू एवरी स्टेट and we have a meeting with the CM and the ministers, and they present a memorandum and they discuss things, and I'm supposed to then follow up and keep in touch as the chief economist. Income distance formula, income distance as the weight of income distance in the horizontal devolution, which means how much each state gets, उसका एक formula होता है. That weight has been the largest for the last 30 years, between 40 and 50%. Actually, the only thing that matters is income distance. But when in the 13th Finance Commission, 2009, 2010, when I went to every state, no state objected. They would say, Maharashtra, my own state would say, देखिए हमारे यहाँ मारसवाड़ा गरीब है, तो ये आप इनकम डिस्टेंस लगा रहे हो, ठीक है, हमें ग्रांट दे दीजिए to help us, look after the poorer parts of my state. Nobody objected to the principle. Why are they objecting to the principle now? I think there are two reasons. There is a economic mismatch between northeast and south and west. The peninsular states are, I told you, 4 times as rich as the northern and eastern states. So basically, but the political power, because they're a majority, is held in the northern eastern states. In fact, they have also suffered politically from this, because what has happened for a long time is that the number of seats in the Lok Sabha, which should be based on one person, one vote, has been frozen at the 1971 population. Since then, the population of the north has increased and the population of the south, relative to the north, has come down. So the southern states, were we to actually fulfill the one person, one vote obligation, would be so disadvantaged that in the next parliament, if that was constituted properly, looking at the 2011 census, even forget the next census, UP plus Bihar plus one northern or eastern state would have a permanent majority in the Lok Sabha and Rajya Sabha. This is scaring the southern states. That is one. So the tension between political devolution, and I'm not contesting it, your listeners have to choose. You either accept one person, one vote democracy or you don't. One person, one vote democracy means the northern states have to get a larger share, unless somehow you get them to migrate to your states. That's a larger story. Otherwise, as things stand, you have to have delimitation. But the question is, if I have delimitation, then why should I, and they have complete political power, why should I continue transferring money to them at the same rate as before? You have taken away the mediating factor there, which is 71 population deciding things. Even the Finance Commission about now the population weight is 2011 population. That is one argument given. That's a very dangerous argument, because that's a political drift. The second argument was given, I think it's a very well put by my friend P.T. Tyagarajan, Minister for Electronics now in Tamil Nadu and Minister of Finance then. He said, see, हम 25 साल से चुपचाप, without quibble, we have been acquiescing to giving money to the northern states disproportionately and the eastern states, the poorer states. इसका अंजाम तो होना चाहिए convergence. But instead the divergence goes on increasing. तो इसका तो कोई accountability हो कि पैसे देने के बावजूद, despite that, why is the divergence increasing? Let me give you a very frightening statistic. Not mine, Arvind Subramaniam and Devesh Kapoor's book. Between 1980 and 2015, the growth rate of the peninsular states, that is South India plus Maharashtra plus Gujarat, was the same as China.
Oh, wow.
If you just looked at India as these 6 states, their prosperity levels would have were on track to hit China on their own. Which means, just imagine if that was their growth rate, what would be the growth rate of North and Eastern India? Abysmal. This is the political economy tension that you're seeing. And for policy wongs, it's very important to have courage. Don't retreat into technical silos when these things are staring at you in the face. It is very important to confront them, understand them, and propose solutions for them. I have proposed 3 solutions, both all difficult. No time to go into them here. Just please Google me if you want to read them.
Okay, let's take in another question from the audience. Piyush Pandey has a very specific question. To overcome India's challenges through structural reforms, don't we need 8% annual real GDP growth? And he says, when I asked a senior government economist, the reply was consider geopolitical conditions and remember economics' first rule, which is ceteris paribus. I don't know if I pronounced that right. Why is the government avoiding this demand raised by many economists?
Well, because we can't. The Chief Economic Advisor's economic survey predicts that growth next year, well, in the next 2 years, will be between 6.8 to 7.2%. That is lower than the growth rate this year, which means we are maxing out on growth this year. So, yes, we do need to get to 8% growth, but that mechanical calculation is not enough. Why are we not able to get there? I'll have to go into each component. Let me go into this. When I first came, I keep coming and going from India, as many of you know. When I came back to India to work for the 13th Finance Commission, I noticed that I asked some economists in Bombay, I said, what are the fast moving indicators of the Indian economy? And they told me FMCG, shampoo sales, aircraft sales, airline seat sales, five-star hotels, real estate in Gurgaon. These are so called fast moving indicators, which they use to track the economy in the short term. I said, Achha, but what about things that not poor people? Poor people don't consume. What about things that people earning the minimum wage consume? What about like food? What about like clothing that cost 300 rupees? What about housing in those days, in today's terms, housing that cost 15, 20 lakhs? Why don't we track these? And the answer was a resounding silence. And the reason for that was India's whole growth story was built on the prosperity of the top 150 million. So that is over now, as your generation is seeing, not yours, Pita, but the younger ones now entering the workforce. Your salaries are collapsing. You're earning less. You're earning in real terms the same as people did in your in your counterpart job 15 years ago. You can't afford to buy a house. You don't pay income tax. There's nothing more worrying to me that educated people in white collar occupations are not paying income tax. Now, what is the solution then? Solution is to have better paid jobs for more people, but how do you get them? There are two things you can do. One, the government has tried and failed. And this, I'm not an optimist on. I'll tell you why. This is an area of economic activity which I have to quote Mahatma Gandhi. When Mahatma Gandhi went to the roundtable conference in London in 2030, some reporters asked him, "So, Mr. Gandhi, what do you think of Western civilization?" He said, "I think it would be a very good idea." Okay. Likewise, when people say we want export-led growth, I say I think it's a very good idea. करके दिखाओ. India's share in global exports, manufacturing exports, is less than 1% of total global exports. It is 0.8% now. It was 0.4% 20 years ago. At this rate, nobody in this room will be alive by the time India's share in global exports even hits 5. China is in double digits. Everybody's higher than us, every developed country. So forget exports. What about the things that Indians want to consume? So I've written at length about this, but let me tell you, there are 5 things that Indians should be able to consume at affordable prices without subsidy. One is a decent meal. The second is 200 rupee shirts, 90% of which today are imported from Bangladesh and Vietnam. We can make 5,000 rupee shirts. We do not have the kshamta nahi hai to make 200 rupee shirts. Housing, not for people living in Gurgaon and Noida, but housing on tickets of 20, 30 lakhs. Okay? Without subsidy. So no avas vavas. Go to the market, get paid, buy a house. I am not a communist. I like the dignity of the market, and everybody deserves a dignity. Healthcare, education. Imagine a world where 60% of our growth came from these 5 things. 20% came from makeup, indigo, huh? Yes, sir, shadi bia, kaju, rich things, what we consume. And 20% came from exports. That growth at 7.5% would raise levels of prosperity in this country so that even if you only attained a per capita income of $10,000, we would be a prosperous country. Also, it is highly likely if you got that pattern of growth, you'll be able to switch from this 7% barrier, where the major constraint is domestic demand. Not domestic demand of the entire country. The fact that the top 150 million, their demand is saturated. Therefore, they're not getting jobs, so it's getting worse. And our inability to meet the demand of the next 300 billion. That is where we need to focus. And if we can adopt that strategy, and again, that involves an incomes policy, then we will see prosperity.
Okay. Ayush Kumar Singh, you had raised your hand. If you have a question, please go ahead, unmute yourself and ask the question. Ayush Kumar Singh, are you still there? We have allowed you to talk. Ask your question.
पूछो भाई.
Okay, I can't hear. Bhargavi, is there a question you wanted to ask? Okay, I don't know. There's some issue there. But there's another question here in the chat box where somebody is asking if you would want to say that what is the one big policy myth from your experience, one misunderstood policy myth about India's economy that people should stop believing?
Oh, that's a very interesting question. There are so many. The first is that uh, India is somehow not capable of engaging in high productivity activities. That Indians are hard workers and they're not smart workers. That's a big myth. The reason why people are only working hard is we don't give them an opportunity to work smart. Let me give you an example that very famous consumption economist Rama Bijapurkar told me. Which is a very interesting example, especially for the women here. So in Bombay, there was a huge rise in domestic workers' wages, mostly female domestic workers' wages about 10, 15 years ago. They demanded it, they got it. There was also pressure because fewer domestic workers were coming. They were opting out of the labor force. The first thing that people in domestic work did with the extra money was buying a mixer grinder. You know why? Such a smart thing to do.
Hmm.
Because of patriarchy in this country, when a woman gets up in the morning, she has to first make food for her husband and children. That will eat into the time she can take to do other jobs. When she buys a mixer grinder, it reduces her labor by about 60%, and therefore she can take one more job and prosper more.
Hmm.
Example number two, women in Telangana after the free bus pass scheme, I don't know about Bangalore. I hear have been asking the ruling party here in this state. Now you've given us free bus passes. We have gone and enjoyed ourselves going to the temple once. Now tell us how we can use these passes to improve our income earning potential. So Indians are very smart. They have to be. If they're given an opportunity to leverage income earning product potential, and that is all about productivity. Now, if you are somebody who has been badly educated, not taught how to do things, I have sort of come across children who can recite an entire page of English prose without understanding a word.
Hmm.
If we are able to get out of this quota syndrome where we send people to get credentials and actually acknowledge productivity comes with proper, genuine education. And we do that on a mass scale. And we have to put in much more money than into education than we are doing now. Okay, both public and private. If you are therefore able to focus on this magic mantra, which is help people to increase productivity, Indians will respond. इंडियंस आर नॉट हिंदी में एक शब्द है गधा मजदूरी हम चॉइस से नहीं करते हैं मजबूरी
Hmm.
से करते हैं मौका दो तो लोग गधा मजदूरी नहीं करेंगे 1.4 billion people have a lot of talent. The second, I think, myth about the Indian economy that we need to dispel is that we have a destiny that is inevitable. No such thing. Okay, there are lots of. I grew up in Bollywood, तो मैं ऐसे मूवी टर्म्स में देखता हूँ. तो ये ट्रैजिक एंडिंग मूवीज विकास के मतलब क्षेत्र में अधिकांश देश ट्रैजिक एंडिंग ही होता है. From Argentina to Brazil to Mexico to South Africa to Nigeria to Egypt to Pakistan to Thailand to Philippines. These are all failed countries. What do I mean by that? I mean the per capita income can go up to $10,000, $15,000, but they face the same problems of poverty, the same problems of crime, the same problems of ill health that a poorer country faces.
Hmm.
Successful countries, South Korea, China, Taiwan, these are relatively few in number. Happy ending nahi hota. And happy ending is not automatic. So
Hmm.
we have to be very conscious about that. And I think the big challenge before this generation is how to make up for our failures of the recent past and to try and get that happy ending happening. Don't take it for granted.
अच्छा, लास्ट टू क्वेश्चंस जो मैं आपसे पूछना चाहूंगी डॉक्टर रॉय. एक, एज स्टूडेंट्स हु कम इन एज पॉलिसी एस्पिरेंट्स, जो हम लोगों के लिए सबसे जरूरी होता है वो होता है डेटा. और डेटा इज ऑलवेज कंट्रोवर्शियल इन इंडिया समहाउ, पर्टिकुलरली इन द लास्ट 10-14 ईयर्स तो बहुत ज्यादा ही ये कंट्रोवर्शियल हो गया है, विवादित हो गया है. तो हमें जब कुछ समझना हो हमारी इकोनॉमी को लेकर, हमारे बजट को लेकर, एज यंग एस्पिरेंट्स, एज पॉलिसी स्टूडेंट्स, वो इवन इफ इट इज समथिंग टू डू विद से फॉर इंस्टेंस अनएम्प्लॉयमेंट, एम्प्लॉयमेंट, हम डेटा, किस डेटा पर यकीन करें, कहाँ से हम डेटा को सोर्स करें?
I don't know. Now in February, we are going to have a revised estimate of everything, GDP, etc., etc. But it's not the data that is at fault, it is how the data is interpreted. I don't think the NSS data or the PLFS data, etc., are in any sense faulty. Very often, the interpretations people make from them, and the assumptions they make, and this is why we have to teach this in policy, matter. So, a good policy analyst will understand not just what data he or she has to look at. वो बाकी काम to say सब data खराब है या पान वालों के बारे में छोड़ दो. Leave that to people who talk outside pan shops. आपका काम यह है डेटा देखना, assumptions देखना. क्योंकि and remember there are some things. So suppose you say there's a debate going on, GDP in India has been overestimated. All right, so what? If it has been overestimated, that is not interesting. The interesting thing, if it's overestimated, then does it mean that there is less GDP in agriculture, industry, or services? उसका परिणाम क्या है? अगर वो परिणाम आपको दिख रहा है, if you're seeing the consequences of the underestimation in livelihoods in one of these three sectors, then focus on that, right? So it's more it's not the quality of data as such. It's very difficult to fudge data at large scale all the time. It's almost as difficult as it is to fudge electoral rolls. Or perhaps slightly more difficult. But my advice to you guys would be, don't worry about whether the data is fudged or not. Go to the data, see what it says. Look at the challenges to that data. Ask what the implications of those challenges would be in the real world around you. So, for example, if the data says that the labor force participation rate has increased for women, very important. So you go and look at it. Where has it increased? If you look at the data carefully, you'll find that the major increase has come in unpaid female labor. इसका क्या मतलब हुआ? इसका मतलब हुआ कि now women are working free in their family farms and therefore the labor force participation rate has increased. You see? So then there's no point. And in the first, a lot of people went and said, oh, this data is fudged. It's not fudged. Go and look at it. Go and look at how they arrived at the result. That's where you, as a technical person, can best use your skills. So you have to move from your technical and analytical skills to assess data to then make a political point, like I'm doing, not the other way around.
Okay. Just a last question then, Dr. Roy. And I don't think अभी और कोई questions आ रहे हैं इस वक्त chat box में. There's been a lot of talk and focus on the labor codes simplification under this government. इस सरकार में जहां कुछ चीजें गलत होती हैं, कुछ चीजें शायद ये सही करने की कोशिश करते हैं, कुछ सिंप्लीफाई करने की कोशिश करते हैं. What's your take कि इसका असर क्या पड़ रहा है in the short term and in the long term? आप कैसे देख रहे हैं इस प्रोसेस को?
देखिए, I think that this is a bit overblown. I know it's very fashionable among people my age, but I want to tell your audience this is a bit retro, okay? 80% of my labor force is in the informal sector. Okay, there is no hire and fire problem. In fact, there's a lot of unfair dismissal that happens. In the university I teach, there is due process followed, but labor codes are not affecting my ability to evaluate people on performance and take performance action against them. Okay. The age of unions in that sense is long gone. They basically exist as blackmailers in the public sector. And the public sector is not rotten because the unions are rotten. The public sector is rotten because its productivity practices are rotten and outdated. Okay. Put another way, the problems in India have to do with the fact that growth in entrepreneurship and working in the private sector is much more difficult to do in terms of making an honest living. जो हम हिंदी में कहते हैं ना, मेहनत की कमाई. And it is much more easy to do haram ki kamai. Let me give you an example. Most wage rates in India have been flat for the last 8 years. People are not borrowing money, they're going debt free. Why? They have realized that you can make more money by selling fewer things and instead doing investment. Most people who have made money in my city, Hyderabad, have done so out of real estate and gold, not by making things or earning an honest day's living. You don't make serious money. You don't buy Skodas and Mercedes. Very few people do. So I think that one, it is misplaced that labor is the binding constraint. That said, I welcome sensible labor codes, but I'm more interested in making sure that the organized manufacturing and formalization increases and we have an incomes policy. Once we have these two with a labor code, then I think we will see progress. Sirf labor code hoke, to talk about people who work for a living as the major impediment to growth in our country is absurd. It is the people who do haram ki kamai that is the major impediment to mehnat ki kamai. So if you can remove that, if you can increase the incomes of people who do mehnat ki kamai, then a labor code with that incomes policy makes a lot of sense.
Okay, I think that's a good note to end this conversation with. And just a quick reminder, जो हमारे साथ तमाम यहाँ पर लोग जुड़ रहे थे, Okay, I'll just take one last question because ये आयुष कुमार सिंह जिन्होंने हाथ रेस किया था, कुछ टेक्निकल गड़बड़ी हो गई थी. He's asking you how much of an effect are the free trade agreements going to have on export manufacturing?
Ayush, my take is nothing. Because I don't think the binding constraint to India's manufacturing exports is tariffs. And therefore, the removal of tariffs, I don't think is a binding constraint. The binding constraint is my productivity is one third that of Vietnam. घर के अंदर देख के हमको पहले घर साफ करना है, ठीक करना है. See, China, anything produced in China that China exported was affordable to Chinese people. So just creating these enclaves and bubbles is not going to help you. जिस दिन हम अच्छे क्वालिटी के चश्मे के लेंसेज बना सकते हैं ना इस देश में, जो लेंस कार्ट कर रहा है, उस दिन we will stop importing lenses that we have seen in chashma. We have to do this 100x, 200x, 300x. I am all for free trade agreements because there is one important thing they do. We call it in economics, again, jargon, gray area dynamic effects. Remember this, want to sound posh. Gray area dynamic, it just means when you're exposed to global thinking, like I have been, you become more cosmopolitan, you become more receptive to the best ideas. Then automatically you're able to improve productivity and enhance productivity. That's what happened in the IT industry, right? For a while. Then they stopped looking. So if we are able to benefit from that, I'm all for it. But that is not going to, it's not a magic bullet. कि FTA कर दिया और अभी exports बढ़ेंगे. That is not going to happen. For that, we have a lot of work to do to set our own house in order.
Chaliye, thank you so much for all of you who tuned in. You can, of course, follow Dr. Roy through his articles in various platforms, including Mint, Economic Times. On Twitter, he's as Emerging Roy. Of course, if you're in GITAM University and Kautilya, you get to interact with him in person more often. And you can look me up on Facebook, Insta, and my YouTube on Smita Sharma Journalist. On Twitter, it's Smita_Sharma. For any questions regarding the admission cycle, which is ongoing, take a look at the Kautilya School of Public Policy website. And if you're interested, please reach out to our teams. Our teams are always accessible regarding your queries. So many thanks once again, Dr. Roy, for joining me on another episode of Let's Talk Policy.
Thank you.
आप सभी का भी हमारे साथ जुड़ने के लिए शुक्रिया. नमस्कार, आदाब.